Hello, everybody. Welcome to another The Ageless Lounge. This week we are visiting with the amazing Sherry Hess of the Flavor Remedy. Welcome, Sherry. Welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So we always start the first top of the moment. What we do is we start with asking you that question: what do you feel it means when I say I believe you're an ageless woman?
You know, for me, being ageless has kind of I think the significance for me comes through the form of creating legacy, as well as really staying ageless in mindset. I think we need to honor aging as this collection of wisdom, and that can certainly be an effect that we have for lifetimes to come. So yeah, I love it.
I love the fact that you're putting it in with like a legacy piece of it because I think that's so important. Like for me, I look at my grandparents, my grandmother, and I never thought of her as old. Even when she was in her 90s, she just still had such life up until the very end. Like I never pictured it as really her being old, right? So I love that you use the word legacy because I think that speaks it. We're all leaving legacies even if we don't realize
Absolutely.
it. So that is fabulous.
Thank you.
Um, Everybody, I want you to know that I met Sherry last year. She came and actually spoke at the Sisterhood Experience with us and did this amazing conversation that I feel taps into part of that living an ageless lifestyle, that becoming ageless, because a lot of it is not just your outward appearance, it's what you do on the inside as well, how you live your day, your daily choices. And she gave a conversation, I want to say a conversation with us all about truly understanding the difference between eating your food and tasting your food. And she had all of us glued to the seats. Like we were all just like in awe of what she was sharing with us. And I will tell you all, I am not a kale fan, but she had brought kale from her own garden and she had us taste the kale. And I was ready to be like, this is going to be the grossest thing I've had to put in my mouth today. And yet when I did it, it was so amazing. And then when you shared about your soils and just all the things I'm going to let you talk about, it was just an amazing way to start looking at the food that I now find myself really tasting my food and looking for the different things I'm picking up on it versus just shoveling it in and eating it. So Sherry, share a little bit about the Flavor Remedy and this tasting versus just eating your food with us.
I
and
have
how
to say, Robin,
how that changes.
I love how you put that, like tasting versus eating. You're absolutely right. That is totally how I talk, but I've never put those words together to create the comparison, and I love it. It's such a beautiful way to like elevate my message. So thank you for that. I think I will be borrowing that. Yeah, so
you are welcome, because that's totally what I think about it with it.
So great. I really love that. So what I'm doing is so simple and yet comes from this concept that we don't really think about the complexity of our human bodies, right? So I loved speaking at your conference because it really represented an age group of women that really have lived through these decades of how our food has changed. And our food has changed a lot in the last 5 decades and beyond, and so what the Flavor Remedy is at its very core is designed to help humans to really recognize that we are not as dumb as we think when it comes to food and nutrition. And we have this innate ability to fully recognize the quality of food, the nutrition levels in our food, and the actual benefits that our food can provide through our tasting experience. And when I say tasting experience, what a lot of people don't really recognize is that when we taste, we're actually engaging all 5 of our senses at once. So a lot of times when we think we don't like a food, it doesn't always have to do with the actual flavors. It might have to do with the aromas that are affecting the flavors. It might have to do with the texture. My son is a big texture guy. Like if it's the wrong texture, he doesn't like it and doesn't want to eat it. And texture has also been changed, in processed foods over the years. It's softer. We don't have to chew it as much. We're drinking our smoothies, right? So texture is a big thing that people aren't necessarily thinking about. But the Flavor Remedy is ultimately what I want to do by really deeply connecting to our sense of taste or our experience of taste is to remember that it's actually serving a purpose to us, that we are able to taste things and recognize what these things are doing for our bodies. And then B, to also recognize that our food has changed over the years, over the decades. Agriculture has changed. It's become industrial. It's become centralized. It's become focused on transportation and yield. Two things that really create a scenario where the food needs to be stronger, more durable, and be able to survive these shipping and also look pretty and shiny and, not be all bruised up in our grocery stores. So in the process of doing that, we've kind of engineered the flavor and nutrition out of our food. And in doing so, food is less flavorful, which lo and behold, humans want flavor, right? We want things to taste good. We want things to have that experience. Yeah. So we've given rise to a lot of flavor manufacturing companies. Enter ultra processed food, right? And it's not a black or white thing. It's very complex. And there's a lot of scenarios where I could say flavorings can be beneficial, but for the most part, because we as a society are not valuing our taste experience in this way as an actual informative system, biological built-in system in our bodies, that a lot of these things are becoming very manipulative and they're having a great effect on our health. Because the truth is, our taste receptors are the very first biological response that we have when we eat. And if we just think about it as being this, does it taste good or does it taste bad? We're missing out on a lot of information that we could be getting from our taste experience. That's a big, long rambling.
Yeah. but that's Keenan. I think, like, again, my first instinct was with some of the things you brought was that kale was going to just not be anything I could do. And yet it tasted so great, but you also emphasized how you grew it. And I think that in some cases we all get this point where we all feel like we don't have green thumbs. So like yours is fabulous, but how could I ever grow that? And then you went to the next step to talk about realizing what's in our soils and how we can kind of control that. Whereas a lot of people, like, you can't control what's in the bigger processed foods that are coming around, right? Whereas you can control in your own backyard. And so for many people in Colorado, they don't think our soil is good enough for planting, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to go to the store and get it. And maybe missing out on that piece that, like, I think that for you in that group, I really took away that we really have more control over discovering those things and fixing them, so to speak, like in our soils, that we can add things, we can do things. Because I really came away feeling like, I also didn't have a green thumb. Now I want to figure out how. And I want to figure out how to go about it so that I can get some foods that taste the way that the ones that you brought to us from your own garden were. So, I mean, maybe share a little bit, like, what do you see as like because for me, food obviously is such a holistic approach to our staying young, right? What goes on the inside really matters on the outside, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. We can do Botox if you love Botox. You can do all these, we dye our hair, not dye our hair. All those things are great on the outside, but we're still affected by what we put on the inside. And as you said, I look at it now and I think, wow, like growing up, like my grandmother always was beautiful and she wasn't doing Botox. She never looked her age. She was just eating, but the food was so different than what we have now at our hands, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit
Yeah. And you're right. Growing food in Colorado is not easy. And that kale that I brought you, to be completely transparent, is a soil that I have been building for the 9 years that I've lived in my house. So again, it's not a quick fix. And I have spent time, a lot of people that garden that are really into soil health are really now recognizing that what really matters is not what's actually you're picking, but the soil and the life of the soil underneath. So it's super complex, and I'm part of these, soil conversations, and I participate in a lot of kind of geeky soil science webinars just to learn and to get information. So, for the average person, it might be a little bit overwhelming to understand what it takes to grow this perfectly delicious food in your backyard, but it's not impossible. And it takes dedication. And the results are really very, very beneficial, right? So it really, I think people have to just measure their priorities when it comes to that. But the good news around that is that we can also understand that these tastes matter, and that we can seek out those farmers and brands and even health practitioners that support this idea and can gather resources so that we can access these things without having to become master gardeners too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's part of the greater mission of the Flavor Remedy, is to help to create levels of education and resource with brands, with farmers, with health practitioners that are following this thread and this shared direction around the fact that flavor equals nutrients, and in order for us to get flavorful, nutrient-dense food, that the practices on our agricultural lands needs to shift away from this chemical dependency that is highly detrimental to the life in the soil. And so this is why I get so jazzed about this stuff, because it's so simple for us to recognize taste and the complexity of taste and the value in that. But we're not even necessarily looking at it as this greater effect on the whole system of the food system. So yeah, what you're saying, and I'll just speak briefly as to why I think you liked that kale versus what you would just get in a conventional grocery store growing is it has to do with the umami flavor that you can taste in really good quality, high protein kale. And so the protein development in a plant and the things that it requires, the microbes that are required to bring the proper nutrients into the plant, has everything to do with the soil. And so when you have a stronger kale plant, I don't know if you remember, I also mentioned that there are sometimes aphids on the plants, right? And and this particular, I had no insect damage on those kale leaves that I brought, right?
Right.
And so the greater effects are so much more than just our taste experience. The greater effects are that the kale was stronger because it was high in antioxidants and polyphenols, which is basically the plant's immune system translated to our immune system. That bitter flavor that comes from those particular compounds is not usually something that we like. But when it's also got that protein boost, which is the umami flavor, it counteracts and balances the bitter. So then you're getting extra protein and extra bitter. So I say it's simple because it's what we're built to know. But when you break it down and try to understand all the different things, there's a lot that has to go into growing really healthy, nutrient-dense foods. And it starts, we can't shift the way we grow and raise our food unless we really start to value the taste of our food. So the eating versus tasting, it can really drive a lot of change in the food system and our health, right? You don't even have to care about the food system. If you just look for complex, nutrient-dense foods for your own health, and you seek flavors that are grown and raised into your food, you can have a systemic effect.
So do you think with that seeking more local farmers, local farming, so that you're getting more what's around you, helps to some way, versus bringing things in from other states or other countries? Is there a difference associated? Do you feel that there's a reason why locally we should be supporting more our farmers and our ranchers for those flavor effects?
Of course, if you have access to those kinds of things, absolutely, because not only then are you getting the freshest, right, you're getting stuff that hasn't been transported as far. And I also recognize that that's not always accessible to people, right? So part of what I'm building with the Flavor Remedy, and this is where I bring in the idea of brands, right? Consumer packaged goods that we all are reliant on. For a while we went through this phase in the health food world of, you should only eat whole foods, and that's great, right? That sounds ideal, but we also live in a very busy world and everybody's looking for convenience. And so beyond having accessibility to food like this, or having local farms nearby. And the other little caveat to some local farms is some people are also leaning into hydroponics. And hydroponics have a place, but they're not contributing to the health of soil because they're actually not soil involved at all. That's not to say they don't have value in, being able to provide things in places where food is not available, but at the same time, they're kind of prolific in the grocery store because they eliminate a lot of the variables that farmers deal with weather and all these other things, right? But my experience is that they're not super flavorful, and that's primarily why all the grocery store tomatoes don't have any flavor, because most of them are hydroponically grown. And you can find those at farmers markets too. Unfortunately, there are some farms that are using hydroponics to supplement their income, and I get it, but without the viability of actually growing food, you do eliminate a lot of the potential nutrient density and flavors. So anyway, my point was more around, there's a lot of brands that are really doing the work to source from these farmers and to bring us more convenient foods that are packaged goods, right? So there's a level of even in packaged goods to look for brands that, you're not seeing a lot of flavorings added to the ingredients, because when you see flavorings added to ingredients, there's a high potential that you're getting flavor without the correlation of nutrients and nutrient density, because flavoring can mask a poor quality food. And you don't know for sure, but flavorings are like ubiquitous on the shelves, and it's really complex to discern. But I do this. There's just a lot to it. So my point is that there are also brands doing the right thing, right? The brands that are supporting these farmers and able to rely on the actual ingredients as opposed to having to flavor something in order to make it taste like what it's supposed to taste like.
So when you say that, I'm thinking about a story my daughter just shared with me last week at the grocery store, because they are very much about reading all the labels and reading all the packages. And when they purchase, they're purchasing the things that have the less amount of anything in them, right? And so they were in the grocery store looking for French fries, and they got out of the car, and I guess they found a bag that literally the list was potatoes and like olive oil, and that was it. And my daughter's like, oh, compared to some of the other packages where it had all this other stuff listed, right? And they got in the car, and my 6-year-old grandson looks at his dad and goes, Dad, we got French fries that are real potatoes. His dad's like, aren't all potatoes real? He's like, it's just potatoes, Dad. It's just potatoes. And he was super excited, my daughter. And I was like, I love that she's already got that. Like her 6-year-old is already thinking like, hey, like we have to have real food. So it was really enlightening, because like, I never used to think about that as well. Now I find myself, again, especially after having heard you, looking a lot more clearly on what is actually in there and what of it is necessary. And again, the whole less is more, right? It really is true, especially in our food. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like there's so much confusion. I'm even confused, and I'm like inundated in this stuff, right? But it's hard to just make food, especially processed food, black and white, right? There's a lot of complexity to it. So what you're saying in keeping ingredients simple is huge. And also, we've, again, because we haven't really valued our tasting experience as this informative, and it helping us to understand nutrition, kind of, we don't hold the value of that. We're looking at an ingredient list and seeing natural flavoring and looking at that word natural and going, oh, well, it's not artificial, so it's great. But that is a huge black hole. You don't know if it is sourced from the actual thing that you think it's sourced from, or whether it's there's a science technology out there called gas chromatography, and basically it's an understanding of the aromatics of food, and the aromatics are the part of our tasting experience, because it's basically what allows us to discern between a blackberry and a blueberry, right? It's the aromas that influence our brain to say, well, this is what I'm eating a blueberry. So this gas chromatography it's basically creating fragrances. It's creating fragrances that are making food taste like what it says on the label, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from that. And so there's a huge black hole of questioning, and they don't have a requirement to be transparent about what those things are. And so, you know, I can't say they're dangerous. I can't say they're going to have an ill effect, but I can pretty confidently say that when there's natural flavorings there's a potential that you're not getting an alignment of food and nutrients. And that's my whole thing. When you are eating foods that are coming from the ground, coming from an animal or a plant, then you are getting the correlation of flavor and nutrients.
And maybe speak a little bit, if you could, like, to the senses. I mean, like, obviously, like, I mean, it all correlates, but like, I don't know how to explain it necessarily exactly. Like, how was it that you were able to get to us, to really stop and taste like food? Like, what if somebody's going, I don't get what you mean by tasting my food versus eating, like I said, right? Like, what would be like the simplest way for you to kind of get them to understand how to start trying to notice taste more?
Yeah. You know, the skill that you brought up is a really important one to start with, and that's reading labels, right? And that's just, that can be super simple, just recognizing. But when you're tasting in life, it's obviously whole food doesn't have labels either. So that's in the case of processed food, in the case of whole foods. But I say that because if you are eating processed, and by processed food, I'm not trying to like vilify that, because processed foods are also shakes and, you know, drinks that we think are healthy, and everything's processed. You cut an apple, you're processing it. But so to answer your question, you know, just start really honing in on recognizing flavors, recognizing something that's sweet. And if you're choosing to eat something sweet, where is that sweetness coming from? This is a big revelation I've actually had since the talk I did with you, because I've since started my nutrition certification. So now I'm really connecting the dots between taste and our biochemical responses. And so when we're tasting something sweet, a lot of times we're probably choosing something sweet without calories now, because we've been told that's a healthy way to lose weight. But the greater effects of our actual sweet taste receptors is that whether it's calorie-free or calorie-full, it still creates an insulin response in our bodies. And insulin resistance is a huge part of what's happening with type 2 diabetes. And so there's a much greater role that sweet is playing from our taste receptor perspectives. But my point is to just know where your flavors are coming from, and then start looking for the flavors that you recognize. So sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and then umami. A lot of people aren't familiar with. It's like a meaty savoriness. And that's what you tasted in the kale, right? So when I say meaty, it's not have to be from meat, right? It's just the protein. It's that savory kind of unctuous flavor that that you can get from plants or animals. So it's.
I love it. I have 3 dogs, so
you know what?
He's added to the conversation.
He wanted to contribute. Yeah. So.
He said, "Mom, tell her this.
Mom, don't forget about my bones. They're umami." That's funny.
Right? Well, you're talking. He's just like, wait, throw this in there.
And yeah, so those 5 flavors, Leo. He's I know what he's barking at. There's one particular person on my trail. But those 5 flavors, I always start with those, and that's what I did at the talk, because those are the tastes. Like, those are the taste receptors that if you held your nose, that you would still experience on your tongue. So those are the physical receptors in our bodies that, you know, that tell us about this nutrition. So we have to start at ground zero. We have to start, and this goes right back to your introduction, tasting and understanding these flavors, and then correlating them to where they're coming from in our food is a really, like, the critical baseline place to start.
Well, I found it really interesting because when you said, holding our nose and still getting that sweetness. I mean, that was really, I'd never done that until our conversation with you that day. And you had 5 of those things for us to taste test. And it was such a new understanding of it, and realizing that. Let's give people, like, if somebody goes, well, this sounds interesting, but I kind of want to, like, how could I go do that? What would be like the 5 things that they could pick at the store to do, kind of do their own little taste test with plugging their nose and that kind of stuff? I mean, what are the 5 that you would recommend they give a try with?
I mean,
now, granted, I know sometimes things are better.
Yeah. And it's also a fascinating
just to get the concept behind that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating experience to do it in 2 different categories, actually. Like, one from nature, which is what I brought you to the talk, right? And then taste it in a manufactured form.
Right.
And in those 2 comparison scenarios, you would really see the effect of aromatics and the effect that they're having on the processed food. Okay, so a sweet perspective, I'll just name the things that I think I brought to the talk. They're usually my go-tos from nature. So salty, you could taste celery. Sweet, I usually offer a date or a raisin, anything that's not coated in something. Now, obviously, if it's dehydrated, it's it's concentrated of sweet, but you can also, if you're careful, you can detect the bitter skins, because sweet never comes alone in nature. It's always packaged with other things. Salty, sweet. Sour would be obviously a lemon, right? And I always invite people to taste the lemon fruit, and then also to taste the lemon rind, because the rind is where the bitter is. And the outside of all skins of fruits and vegetables are where the immune system of the plant are, which supports your immune system, and that's what bitter does. So speaking of bitter, a great thing to taste is like a bitter green. We did kale at the event, but you could do a stronger bitter like a dandelion, arugula. And then umami, I usually have seeds, just raw sunflower seeds, not salted, not roasted, just a raw sunflower or a raw nut of some kind would be a great way to look for that umami flavor. And then from a manufactured standpoint, you could, it's actually interesting to compare it to like a calorie-free sweetener, and just to see the difference in your taste experience, and also to look for like the aftertaste and things like that. So you could do a diet soda, you could do a diet drink of any kind. Let's see, salty. I mean, any processed food is so full of salt, and they're just iodized, bleached salt that removes all the minerals. Sweet, salty, sweet, sour. Look for something that has citric acid in it. I mean, Sour Patch Kids would be it's sweet and sour together. But citric acid is another ingredient that's really in a lot of things, because it gives you that pop of flavor that makes it taste more exciting, but it's also a preservative. It increases the acidity of the food and makes it more shelf stable. Citric acid. And then bitter. It's hard to find bitter in manufactured foods. They actually purposely remove bitter flavors from things. Because they tell everybody it's not good for you, which is only the smallest part of the story. Because obviously poisons taste bitter, but we're not talking about poisons in the grocery store. So, so it's hard to find something in bitter, but the point of bitter when you're looking for things is that they do remove it, and that's because it helps to create satiation, and the food company doesn't want you to feel satiated. So that's convenient. And then umami. Umami is everything that tastes savory to you. So a Dorito is a classic. A Dorito is actually a really great way to look for all of these flavors and to hold your nose and notice the difference, because there's a whole book called The Dorito Effect written by Mark Schatzker, where he, and I think I probably had a quote of that on my presentation too, but he really goes into how the Frito-Lay company was huge in this process of gas chromatography and recreating these scents that have a texture of the flavor we're looking for the cheese, the tomato, the pepper, the garlic, all the things that we taste in a Dorito that we think are food that are really just these aromas. So when you taste a Dorito, and then taste it holding your nose, it's a massively different experience. And that might just be enough to cover all the flavors, honestly, because it's super powerful. It's putting cheese. It's trying to recreate tomato. It's trying to recreate, all these things. But monosodium glutamate, which used to be all red flagged, and now it's just back in everything. And yeast, hydrolyzed yeast. Those are two really popular ingredients that are going to give you that umami flavor, which is supposed to be protein and absolutely has no protein in it. So it's a really classic example of a flavor that humans love that we're getting in mass amounts without the actual correlated nutrition that goes with that flavor.
Well, I mean, okay, so let's do this real quick because we're coming almost close to our ending time here because we don't want to go too long. But I want you to tell people where they can find information from you, find out about the Flavor Remedy, find out some of the things you're offering, because I know you have things on the horizon you're working on as well. So tell us where we can find you to delve more into this, because I mean, there's so much to nutrition that affects our aging, in my opinion. And I feel like we have to talk about it. We have to start thinking about our foods more the way we start thinking about how we want to take care of our outsides. We have to start thinking more about clearly how we're going to take care of our insides. So tell us where we can find you.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And also, I'm going to actually circle back to the question you asked me is the legacy thing. We need to be thinking about food beyond just our own personal health. We need to be thinking about what's going to happen for generations to come. For your was it your grandson, right? That was all excited about the potatoes. This is my work is meant to be generational. So we need to make big shifts in our food system and our personal health. Okay, so you can find me on theflavorremedy.com. I also am on LinkedIn. That's probably where I do most of my general sharing of information and thoughts and journaling and blogging and that kind of stuff. I also have a Facebook page, but Facebook is, who knows what Facebook is these days. So I'm not super active.
Right.
Yeah. But probably the best thing to do would just be, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so on LinkedIn, is it under Sherry Hess, or is it the Flavor Remedy, or do you have both, like a page that they can follow as well as you?
Yep, I think if you looked for Sherry Hess Flavor Remedy, my link is actually Sherry Hess Flavor Remedy. It's all one thing. So I think if you searched for either one, you would find me. I don't have a specific business page, so it's more my personal profile. Yeah. And some of the things I'm creating, I'm super excited. Probably the goal right now is June. I'm going to be launching something called the Taste Coalition. And the Taste Coalition is designed to bring all of these different sectors of business that relate to food together to help really, build momentum around this idea that our sense of taste and our tasting experience is hugely important, and that by helping to educate consumers to shift to this idea that we're meant to connect to nature, and that's how we get the most trustworthy correlation of flavor and nutrients, and to really just gather people together. So that's aiming to bring together health practitioners, regenerative farmers, brands that are sourcing from these farmers that are growing and raising food in healthier ways, and even just consumers and eaters to come in and to listen and to learn and to understand the value of these things. Also on the radar for that, I'm hoping will join is food scientists, people that really do understand the effects of our taste and what it can do to support us in better ways. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm launching this year, and we'll see where it goes. Hopefully it creates systemic change.
Well, I think it's bound to in some matter. Like I said, the women that were in that room, when they were talking about the different speakers, you were one that was in like the top 2 of conversations that they just were enthralled with, and really took away thinking and redirecting some of their thoughts in relative to their food. So I think that's amazing. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for spending time with us today. Everybody, Flavor Remedy, go and check it out. Reach out to Sherry if you have questions. I mean, she's just amazing, and what you're doing is amazing. And like you said, you're helping us leave legacies for our family and our future generations, which I think is more important, because we just need to leave them a better better space than where we're at right now with the way the system is all about junk food, especially, and really get back to, the nutrients, the health. I mean, when you look at the 50s and 60s and you look at us now, we are such different body compositions than we were that it's like, what are we doing wrong now? We're supposed to have more education, more, but yet we are at our unhealthiest overall as humans right now than we've ever been, especially here in the USA. So
Absolutely.
the work you're doing is amazing.
Thank
It's
you.
fantastic. And thank you for sharing a bit of yourself with us today.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Bye, everybody. Till next week.